She was screaming so loud I could hear it through my son's voicemail. I was sitting on a bench in Krakow, watching pigeons circle the old market square, drinking coffee that cost less than $1, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just quiet. The kind of quiet I hadn't felt in 31 years. Let me go back to the beginning. My name doesn't matter much. People around here call me Raymond. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 of those years married to a woman named Diane. I worked as a structural engineer for the same firm in Cincinnati for 28 years. I coached my daughter's soccer team when she was 9. I shoveled the driveway every winter without being asked. I remembered anniversaries. I called her mother every Sunday even when I didn't want to, and none of it was ever enough. I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling this story to drag anyone through the mud. I'm telling it because I think a lot of men my age, men who gave everything they had to a life that quietly decided it didn't want them anymore, deserve to hear that there is something on the other side. Something good. Something real. But first you have to understand what I was walking away from. Diane and I met in 1992 at a company picnic. She was there with a friend who worked in accounting. I was 29 and thought I was charming. She laughed at exactly the right moments and had this way of tilting her head when she listened to you that made you feel like the most important person in the room. I proposed 8 months later. Everyone said we were moving too fast. We didn't care. For the first 10 years, I think we were genuinely happy. We bought a house in a good neighborhood on the east side of Cincinnati. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, the kind of house you put a tire swing in and imagine your grandchildren playing there someday. Our daughter was born in 1995. Our son was born in 1998. I worked hard. I got promoted. Diane decorated the house beautifully, stayed home with the kids when they were small, then went back to work part-time at a real estate office when our son started middle school. The shift was so gradual I didn't notice it happening. That's the thing nobody tells you about a marriage falling apart. It doesn't fall. It settles. Like a house with a bad foundation, everything looks fine on the surface for a long time, and then one day you press your hand against the wall and feel it give just slightly, and you realize the cracks have been there for years. By the time our kids were in high school, Diane and I were living parallel lives in the same house. Polite, functional, empty. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself this was what long marriages look like. I read books about it. I suggested counseling twice. The first time she said we didn't need it. The second time she said I was being dramatic. I stopped suggesting things after that. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that Diane had been building a separate life for at least 4 years before I found out. Not just emotionally, financially. His name was Gerald. He was 58, recently divorced, and he ran a property management company that Diane's real estate office occasionally partnered with for rental listings. She had known him professionally for 6 years. Apparently that professional relationship had become something else entirely somewhere around year 2. I found out the way most people find out. Not dramatically. Not with lipstick on a collar or a text message left open on a counter. I found out because my son, who was 24 at the time and had just started working in finance, was helping me refinance our home equity line of credit. He needed some documents from Diane's computer because our shared files were stored there. She was traveling for work that weekend, or so she said. My son called me into the home office with a look on his face I'd never seen before. "Dad," he said, "you need to see this." There was a folder on the desktop. It wasn't hidden well. Or maybe she never expected either of us to be looking. Inside were 3 years of financial records. A joint savings account I didn't know existed, opened in her name and Gerald's. Monthly transfers from our household account, small enough that I'd never flagged them individually, but 3 years of small adds up. I sat there and did the math in my head twice, because I didn't believe it the first time. $87,000. $87,000 moved out of the life we built together and into something she was building without me. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I sat very still for a long time while my son stood in the doorway not knowing what to do with his hands. Then I said, "Close the door, please," and I started making calls. I called a lawyer that Monday. I did not tell Diane what I had found. My lawyer advised me to document everything first, which took about 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I went to work every day. I came home every evening. I ate dinner across from a woman who was stealing from me, and I said, "How was your day?" and meant nothing by it. The divorce filing was the first time I saw her genuinely rattled. She had expected, I think, that I would be devastated, that I would beg, that I would offer to go to counseling, to change, to do whatever she needed. That's what the previous version of me would have done, but I had spent those 6 weeks doing something I had never really done in 31 years of marriage. I had been thinking about myself. My lawyer was very good. We recovered most of it. The hidden account was flagged. The transfers were documented. Diane's attorney tried to argue that it was household savings she was managing independently, but the account was in both her name and Gerald's, and that was difficult to explain away. We settled without going to trial. I kept the house, which I promptly listed and sold, because I had no interest in living in it alone. I got a fair settlement on the equity. The pension I had built over 28 years remained entirely mine. What I lost was harder to put a number on. My daughter, her name is Vanessa, was 27 when the divorce was finalized. She had always been closer to her mother. I understood that, or I tried to. But the way she handled the divorce was something I was not prepared for. She didn't yell at me. She didn't take sides loudly. She just withdrew. Stopped returning calls as quickly. Started referring to Gerald in conversations as though he was simply a fact of life, like weather, something to be accepted without comment. And then, about 4 months after our divorce was finalized, Diane announced her engagement to Gerald. 4 months. 31 years of marriage, and 4 months later she was engaged to the man she had been siphoning money toward for 3 years. My son was angry on my behalf, but Vanessa called me and said, and I want to get this exactly right because I've thought about it many times since. She said, "Dad, I hope you can find a way to be happy for Mom. She deserves to be happy too." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Vanessa, so do I." She didn't have an answer for that. I had already been thinking about leaving, not running. I want to make that distinction clearly because there's a difference between running from something and walking toward something. I wasn't running from Diane or from Gerald or from the embarrassment of a failed 31-year marriage in a city where everybody knew my name and my firm and my kids' high school soccer stats. I was walking towards something I had been quietly researching for 2 years. I had a colleague, a man named Dennis, who had retired 3 years before me, who had moved to Poland, Krakow specifically. He sent me emails occasionally, photos of the old city, his monthly expenses, the pace of life. I had read those emails with a kind of wistful hunger I didn't entirely understand at the time. I understand it now. I was already trying to find the door. I retired at 61. I sold the house. I put what I needed in storage, gave a great deal away, and I bought a one-way ticket to Krakow with a return ticket I fully intended never to use. That was 22 months ago. I want to tell you about my life here, because the question I get asked most, from the few people who know where I am, is what it's actually like. Whether it's lonely, whether I regret it. My apartment is in the Kazimierz district. It costs me less per month than my car insurance used to. It has exposed brick walls and tall windows that face a quiet street where a woman sells flowers from a cart every Tuesday and Thursday morning. My neighbors are a retired schoolteacher named Bogdan and a young couple who play guitar on their balcony on warm evenings and never too late. I've learned enough Polish to be polite and to order food and to apologize, which turns out to be most of what you need. I wake up without an alarm. I make coffee on the stove. I read for an hour, real books, the kind I never had time for. I walk. I have walked every street in this city at least twice. I know where the best bread is and where the pigeons are fattest and which cafe has the kindest staff on a slow Tuesday afternoon. My monthly expenses are just under $2,000. That includes everything: rent, food, occasional travel, a gym membership, the language classes I take on Wednesday mornings because Bogdan told me it was embarrassing that I still couldn't conjugate verbs properly, and he was right. For the first time in 31 years, I am living a life that is sized exactly for me. I was 3 months into Krakow when my son called to tell me that Vanessa had agreed to be the maid of honor at Diane and Gerald's wedding. I thanked him for telling me. I wasn't angry at Vanessa. I was tired in a particular way. The way you get tired not from work, but from realizing that certain things will simply always be what they are. What I did not expect was a call from Dennis, my retired colleague. Dennis knew Gerald peripherally. Property management and structural engineering occasionally intersect when you both worked in Cincinnati long enough. He called me on a Sunday afternoon, which was evening in Krakow, and said, "Raymond, I don't know if you want to know this, but I think you should." What he told me took about 10 minutes. I asked 2 questions. Then I thanked him and sat by my tall window for a long time watching the street below. Gerald's property management company was under investigation. Not dramatically, no police, no headlines, but the Ohio Department of Commerce had opened an inquiry into his business practices involving a series of rental properties he had misrepresented to investors. 3 of those investors had filed formal complaints. The amounts involved were significant. The joint account Diane had been funding for 3 years, the one that had been flagged in our divorce proceedings, had apparently been used as part of this pattern, which meant that the woman who had moved $87,000 out of my life was about to marry a man who was going to need a very good attorney. I didn't call Diane. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't send an email or a warning or a word of advice. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that justice has its own schedule and does not need my help. The wedding was in October. My son went because Vanessa asked him to, and he is a kinder person than circumstances required him to be. He sat near the back. He said the venue was nice. He said Gerald seemed confident. The ceremony was outdoors at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside Cincinnati. 70 or 80 guests, string lights, a catered dinner. The kind of wedding that announces itself. During the reception, one of Gerald's business partners, a man my son had never seen before, someone who had apparently driven 3 hours to be there, walked up to Gerald at the head table during the dinner service. My son was close enough to hear. The man leaned down and said, quietly, but not quietly enough, "The second filing came through this morning. You need to call me tomorrow. This is serious." Gerald's expression didn't change for 3 full seconds. Then it changed all at once. Diane saw it. She was sitting beside him. She reached over and put her hand on his arm and asked what was wrong, and Gerald said, "Nothing, it's business," and poured himself more wine. My son said she sat very still for the rest of the dinner. She laughed when she was supposed to laugh. She danced the first dance. She cut the cake. But he said, and he told me this carefully, the way he tells me things when he's not sure how I'll receive them. He said that when the dancing started and the lights went low, he saw her step away from the crowd and stand alone at the edge of the vineyard, looking out at the dark, and she stayed there for a long time. He asked me on the phone afterward whether I felt sorry for her. I thought about it honestly. I said, "I feel something. I'm not sure sorry is the right word." What I actually felt was a kind of release, not triumph, not vindication exactly, just the particular sensation of a door finally closing on a room you've been trying to leave for years. Vanessa called me 2 weeks after the wedding. This was unusual. She typically texted. She asked if she could talk. I said of course. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, I owe you an apology." I didn't rush her. She said she had spent a long time being angry at me for things she couldn't articulate, and she thought the anger had come from somewhere she hadn't examined honestly. She said she had found out, through her mother of all sources, about the joint account, about how much had been transferred, about the timeline of when Gerald had come into the picture versus what Diane had told her. She said, "I kept thinking you must have done something to push her away. I needed it to be your fault somehow. And I think I told myself stories to make that work." I said, "Vanessa, you were protecting your mother. I understood that." She said, "You were also my father." We talked for almost 2 hours. It was the longest conversation we'd had in 4 years. When we hung up, I sat with it quietly for a while. Then I went downstairs and bought flowers from the woman on the card, even though it wasn't Tuesday or Thursday, because she was there and they were beautiful, and I felt like being someone who buys flowers for no reason. She visits me next month, Vanessa. She has never been to Poland. She keeps sending me messages asking whether she needs to bring a coat, and I keep telling her it's May. She'll be fine, but to bring the coat anyway. My son has already visited twice. He and Bogdan. My retired schoolteacher neighbor have somehow become unlikely friends, bonded initially over chess and increasingly over Bogdan's very strong home-brewed beer, which I have advised my son to approach with respect and a good night's sleep scheduled for the following day. Gerald's situation, as best I can tell from what Dennis passes along, is ongoing. I don't follow it closely. The outcome is not mine to manage. I gave a statement when asked during the original divorce proceedings, and I have nothing further to add. Diane, I hear, is not well, not physically, but in the way a person becomes unwell when the story they told themselves stops holding together. I do not wish her harm. I do not wish her anything particularly, which is its own kind of peace. What I want to say to any man out there who is sitting in a house that no longer feels like his, doing the math on how many years he's given and how little he has left over, is this: I know how it feels to believe that leaving is the same as failing. I spent years in that belief. I renovated it and maintained it and paid the mortgage on it long after the structure had become unsound. Leaving was not failing. Leaving was the first honest thing I had done in a very long time. I'm 63 years old, and I wake up every morning in a city that does not know my history or my mistakes, or the particular weight of 31 years of quiet. I drink coffee that costs less than $1. I walk streets I am still discovering. I am learning, badly and slowly, to conjugate Polish verbs. Bogdan says my progress is modest but genuine. I have chosen to take this as high praise. There is a life on the other side. It does not look like the life you planned. It is not wrapped up cleanly with all accounts settled. Some doors close slowly. Some people you love will take longer than you'd like to find their way back to you. But the quiet, the real quiet, the kind that comes from living a life that is genuinely yours, that is available to you. I promise you that. I'm Raymond. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story reached you, if it sat somewhere in your chest and felt familiar, I hope you'll stay with us. There are more stories here, and if you have one of your own, leave it below. I read every word.